Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland, and part of what we do is talk with webmasters and publishers like the ones here in the Hangout and the ones that submitted lots of questions. As always, we have a chance for those who are kind of new to these Hangouts to ask questions before we get started with the submitted ones. Is there anyone here who wants to go ahead and take a shot? No. Okay. Well, we'll still have room for more questions toward the end. So I'll just go through the questions that were submitted. I see one of them here has lots of different parts, which makes it kind of hard to read. It usually helps to keep things really short and to the point so that I can go through one of these questions and figure out what it's actually about. So let me see where this one starts. We have multiple brands, and they're on separate domains, and we want to move them to, I think, subdomains. But still, of course, rank number one, like everyone else. Is it a problem to go to subdomain, or should I stay on separate domains? From my point of view, you can definitely move to subdomains. If that works better for you, go for it. That's not something where I'd say you'd be worse off on subdomains. We do try to understand the structure of these sites. So if you have the whole one normal website spread out across a lot of subdomains, which we sometimes see if people have like wildcard subdomains set up, then we'll probably recognize that as one site. Whereas if we recognize that there are multiple sites using subdomains, we'll recognize those as multiple sites. So it's not necessarily something that always goes one way or the other. Would it be possible to provide more query data in Search Console? Right now, a lot of queries slip through the cracks, as only the top 1,000 queries are shown, or 999. So the 999 comes from one query being filtered, where essentially we don't have enough query information for that query, and we don't know what we can really show there. So that's why some people have 1,000, some people have 999. Theoretically, lots of things are possible, but as always, we have to kind of balance the different things to work on when it comes to features like Search Console, Search Analytics. We have to understand, like, is it worth putting more query data in here, or would it be better to add a new feature for some other feature, or to add something else really fancy that people have always wanted? So these are the kind of trade-offs we have to make. And I believe Zineb has been asking on Twitter for more information on what people would do with more data in Search Analytics. So I'd check out her Twitter account and give her feedback if there's something that you feel you would do differently if you had this kind of data. Another option is, of course, to use the API and to try to automatically filter down more information so that you can get some of these queries that you might be missing. Another idea might be to separate your site into sections. If you have really logically distinct sections of your website that you want to look at separately, then maybe it makes sense to just look at a subdirectory or a subdomain of your whole site. Site colon query results. What order are they displayed in? This is pretty much no specific order. So it's not that you can pull out any kind of secret information by looking at the site query results. Usually we'll have something like the home page as the first one, but that's not always the case. And that's not necessarily a sign of a problem if your home page isn't the first one for a site query. So from our point of view, a site query is an artificial query. It's not something where someone is specifically looking for anything specific. So the order, kind of the relevance of the results there isn't something where we'd say there's a well-defined order that we need to provide. We know HTML sitemaps can be useful for users, but is there any SEO value in them? If we're already doing XML sitemaps and submitting that to Search Console, any SEO value in HTML sitemaps? I don't know. Sometimes it can definitely make sense to have these kind of HTML sitemaps, which are essentially kind of like a mapping of your category and your detail pages, especially if we can't crawl a website normally otherwise. So if you have a really complicated navigation structure, maybe if you have pages that are almost connected just through search forms rather than a logical site structure, then at least having one place where we kind of understand the structure of the site based on the links, that can really help us.
So if the owner doesn't want to add the sitemap in Search Console, so Googlebot will recognize the HTML sitemap and go from there?
Yeah, I mean, we use HTML sitemaps to understand the structure of the site, to find the URLs, but there's obviously a lot more information in XML sitemaps, things like the change dates, for example, that tell us that these pages actually changed, which if you have a larger website, then letting us know that this section of your site or this specific detail page changed recently makes it a lot easier for us to crawl there and to actually update our index based on that change. So that's something you wouldn't be able to do with an HTML sitemap. It's almost like an HTML sitemap could be comparable to normal sites navigation. And if you already have a good site navigation, then you probably don't need an HTML sitemap for search engines at least.
But Bot is still amazing in recognizing sites without the HTML page like sitemaps as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you have a normal site structure and normal navigation within your website, that's perfectly fine. We can find all of those pages. So this is more like if you already have a website that you know is kind of bad with the navigation, then HTML sitemap can help a little bit. But on the other hand, if you know that your website is bad with the navigation, then you might as well just fix that too, to kind of tackle the problem at the root. All right. It's a common rule to just use one H1 tag per page. Is it a problem if Google uses for Google to use multiple H2 or H3 tags on a page? That's perfectly fine. That's definitely not a problem from our point of view. You could also, if you wanted to, have multiple H1 tags, and we'd probably be able to deal with that as well. So that's something where the headings help us to better understand the structure of the page, the context of the text and the images on the page. So if you can structure your page in a way that we can understand that this block belongs together and this block belongs together, then that helps us. And it's not necessarily the case that you have to limit yourself to one H1 or always have this clean structure of H1, H2, H3. Some pages just have H3 tags on there, and that helps us to understand the structure as well.
Yes. So, John?
Yes. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. So, John, it means keywords being in a heading tag or in simple content doesn't make any difference to search engine? The content should be good.
Well, obviously having some information what the sections of the page are about with the keywords, for example, that helps us. So it's not the case that you would want to like just put an image in the heading and not tell us anything about what the section is about. On the other hand, just stuffing keywords in a heading doesn't really help that much either. Or marking up the whole page and saying the whole page is actually one big H1 tag, and assuming that Google will give this page more weight, that's not going to happen.
Okay.
I mean, these are things that everyone has tried out, probably.
So-called the classic SEO.
Yeah.
I just have a follow-up question there, John. Does it matter at which point do you put the most important keyword? So should your most relevant keyword be on the H1 right at the top of the page, or can it be like lower down on the page and have like a less relevant H2 tag higher up? Does it make a difference what order it's in on the page?
We essentially want to understand what this page is about, and the clearer you can make that for us, the easier it is for us to pick up, and of course also the easier it is for users to understand that this is the page that they're actually looking for. So I would definitely not put the most important keywords or terms that you're trying to rank for somewhere way on the bottom in the footer in small font somewhere, but rather make it really clear that this page is about this topic. And you probably have that in the headings. You might have that in the title. You might have that in multiple places.
Okay, thanks, John.
By the way, I noticed that you can use anchors on the headings, and then you can link to them, and Google will pick that up. So it will show them in the search results, under the result itself, under the meta description. It will show the anchors of that you marked up for the headings.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes we do that.
And that can help with click-through rates, so that's really cool.
Yeah, if it's a longer page and we can understand the structure properly, and you have these, I don't know what they're called, jump marks or anchors within the page where you can go directly to a specific part of the page, then sometimes we do show that as a type of almost like site links below the page. Okay, here's a question about redirects. Everybody loves redirects, 301 or 302. We should change our opinion from time to time, just to throw people off, or maybe not. Redirect chain, a 302 to a 301 to a 200, or a 301 to a 200 directly. Which one passes the most link juice? Or PageRank? From our point of view, they essentially do the same thing. So you're forwarding users from one page to another, and depending on which of these pages we keep in the index, that'll be the one that kind of collects all of these signals. So if we decide to index the destination page, then that one will be the one that collects the PageRank and the other signals from that page. If we decide to index the redirecting page, then that will be the one that gets all of these signals. So it's not the case that a 302 kills any PageRank, or that you need to do a 301, and if you combine a 301 with a 302, then you get 50%. Essentially, we try to pick out which of these URLs we want to keep indexed, and that's the one that's going to get signals.
John, is it the case, though, with 302s that maybe you wait a bit more to be sure whether you should treat it as a 301?
Probably. So essentially, that's a hard question. That's a really hard problem, kind of deciding which URL to actually keep indexed. So it's essentially the question of canonicalization. You have two URLs. There's some signals between those URLs that you know about. And the question is, which one of these should you show in the search results? Which one should be the canonical URL? And if you have a redirect, then that helps us to understand the situation a little bit better. With a 302, you're saying that the redirecting URL is the one that you prefer, and a 301, you're saying the destination one is the one that you prefer. So a 302 is kind of like saying, well, this one is better, and 301 would be saying that one is better. But we don't look at just the redirects. We look at other things as well. So if there's a canonical tag on this page, how the internal links within the website kind of point at these pages, what you have in your sitemap file, external links as well. All of these things kind of add up, and they say, well, overall the signals point at this URL, or overall the signals point at that URL. So it's not so much a case that you leave a 302 in place for a while and then it magically turns into a 301. It's more the case that over time, these signals change. And if everyone starts linking to the destination page, but there's a 302 redirect, then probably we should be indexing the destination page instead, because that's the one everyone is using. So it's really a hard problem, I'd say, with search engines to pick the right canonical URL. And this is something that we have teams that are still working on this. So it's not a solved problem, even though we've been at it for such a long time.
Okay, so it's the case that with the more signals you have that conform a certain scenario, the better are you at understanding whether you should treat it
exactly
like this or that. Yeah.
Exactly. That's kind of why we say you should be consistent, because if you have a redirect in place and you tell us a little bit that maybe you prefer this one, but some of your site says prefer the other one, then we're kind of torn. We don't really know, and it could go either way. But if you're really consistent and say everything should point at this URL, I have internally all my links at this URL, there's a canonical setup clean, the redirects are clean, the sitemap is clean, everything is pointing at this URL, then we'll say, well, you know, it's no question. It's like the webmaster really, really wants this one, so we'll pick that one for the index instead.
Because AMP is live now, AMP is live, are you going to make that a ranking signal?
AMP a ranking signal. At the moment, it's not a ranking signal. So it's obviously one way to make really good mobile-friendly pages. So that might be an option where I've already seen some sites that have moved their whole website to the AMP format. And obviously, that's a mobile-friendly setup. So that kind of gets that mobile-friendly boost. But just AMP itself is not something that we have as a ranking signal at the moment.
Like they also updated their plugin in WordPress, so it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I even put it on my blog. Now I just need to generate some newsworthy content and kind of hide all of those 8-year-old posts.
And put it in live on Google News.
I don't know if I could get it in Google News. I probably wouldn't pass the criteria. Like posting once every 8 years is kind of, I don't know, not a perfect news source.
You could answer my question. That might be newsworthy.
Your question. Oh, your general question. I don't know. I don't know. Now it's getting tricky. Let's continue with the questions that were submitted. If I have a website, page.com, and the content in English, and I want to create the same in Spanish, is it better to create a separate page, like page.es, or include a translator on the original page and redirect it to .com? So in general, for multilingual pages, we recommend making the language clear per URL. So you have one page in English, one page in Spanish, and the whole page is in Spanish, and the whole page is in English. And with that, it's a lot easier for us to recognize this is the English page, and we should redirect people to the English page. And we don't have this situation where the page is part English, part Spanish, and we don't really know which language this page should be ranking for. So from the general question here, should I make separate URLs or to use the same URL, I would definitely use separate URLs. You don't have to put it on a separate domain, though. When it comes to language, essentially you can use any unique URL per language. That could be with a parameter at the end. That could be a separate subdirectory or a subdomain. But it doesn't have to provide any structure of information for a specific language. When it comes to geo-targeting for countries, there we do need to kind of understand the structure of the site and say this whole part of the website is for that country. But for languages, you can use whatever structure you want. In Search Console, a website ranks position 1 for most keywords. We discovered these positions reflect the presence on the map above the organic results. But is there a way to see the organic listings rather than the map listings in Search Console? I don't think we differentiate that within Search Console. So we essentially look at the normal web search results that we'd show if you just go to Google and search for something. And if your site ranks in one of those blocks on top, which might be kind of the, what is it called, the featured snippet on top, or with a map entry or a news entry, or in the AMP carousel, then that's what we'd count as the ranking. So where the rest of your site ranks within the organic search results is not something that we take into account there. And specifically for Search Console, we use the average position of the topmost result for your website. So if your website ranks number 1, number 7, and number 9, for example, in one search results page, then we take that number 1 ranking and use that for Search Console. We wouldn't kind of reflect the lower rankings of the other pages there. What you can do, however, is look at it on a per URL basis, and that does give you a little bit more information there. So for your home page, obviously, it'll be tricky in this situation because your home page will be the one that's probably connected to your map entry. For other URLs that are also ranking in the search results, you can, however, see this specific URL is ranking in this position for these keywords. So that's one way to kind of get more detailed information there. The important part here is also to keep in mind that when you're looking at it per query, we aggregate that across your site. Like I mentioned, the topmost result from your site, you use that. And when you're looking at it per URL, we look at it per URL. So the numbers there won't necessarily add up completely.
And John, are they supposed to roughly agree from analytics to Search Console? Because I remember the thing that Mihai and I both mentioned on Tuesday about our www appearing within as one of the queries in analytics, that over the last 90 days that has something like 4,000 impressions. In console, it has 400 impressions.
Okay.
No payments from that email address.
Yeah. I don't know. Usually, I'd expect the trends at least to kind of line up. But
I added that image to the chat as well, so you could see it again. So Mihai could grab it again. It's trying to get to the bottom of whether someone is genuinely searching for that URL, or whether it's something they're just typing in, and there's somehow their browser or toolbar or something is triggering a search, and it's not. Like, there's so many searches for a www and no clicks that it's just weird.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll double check what you posted in the chat afterwards.
But in general, they should roughly match Webmaster Tools.
Yeah. I mean, they won't be exactly the same because of the way Search Console counts and the way Analytics counts. In general, trends should be kind of aligned, and there should be similar so it shouldn't be that like 400 versus 4,000 that you mentioned.
Right. Yeah, they're all. I mean, there's a lot that are similar. You know, just for the two-word name experience days, one is 2,500, one is 5,000. You know, they're way off. Yeah. That's not to say that ours is the best example to use for results that everyone else can pin their hopes on.
Yeah.
I'm assuming whatever problems we have, we could at least still measure the results accurately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to whether they're good or bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, it's just, well, I've posted the image again.
I'll take a look at that.
Just,
okay. All right. If a project is, for example, a sports event site with events which naturally expire, for example, a cricket match, would you add the expires after a header tag and then set the response code to 410 after the expiration time and date? Probably. If you're sure that these are URLs that wouldn't be relevant afterwards, then you can definitely use the expires tag and expires after meta tag and use the 410 or 404 would work just as well to kind of let us know that this is not relevant anymore and that we can drop it out of the search results. Of course, some types of events you might want to keep longer, so it's not necessarily something where I'd say any event that has already taken place should be deleted from the index. It really depends on the site itself. For some sites, it definitely makes sense to kind of weed out all of the old stuff so that you can focus on the new ones. For other types of sites, maybe the old events are really the ones that provide value for your website. Does a site-wide internal link get treated any different from a footer site-wide link? And would the amount of PageRank that's passed be less than having the link on, say, the best pages only? This is kind of a tricky question, I guess. Within a normal website, I wouldn't worry about where you kind of link to your pages, and essentially we try to figure out the structure of the site and understand how these pages belong together, what the context is of these individual links, and how we can understand one page a little bit differently from the other page. If you're talking about linking from one site to another site, that sounds an awful lot like unnatural links, where you're kind of optimizing the position of the link to your site on someone else's site, and that's really something I'd recommend not going down the path of. So again, if this is just internal within your website, do whatever makes sense for the users so that we can still find the link to that page and we can try to understand the context. If you're placing links on other people's sites, then I try to avoid that. In 30,000 unique URLs on a site, if the average crawl rate is 5,000 per day by Google, is that a good or bad sign? That can be perfectly fine. So what's kind of worth keeping in mind with the crawl rate of a website is we're not crawling random URLs from the website, like random 5,000 URLs, or like lining all the URLs up and going through those 5,000. We're crawling some pages a lot more frequently and other pages a little bit less frequently. So within those 5,000, you'll probably have a lot of pages that get crawled maybe daily, and a bunch of pages that get crawled maybe once a week, and then a bunch of other pages that might get crawled once a month or even less frequently. So it's kind of a mix there. You can't say, well, 5,000 a day, 30,000 total, therefore it'll take, I don't know, 6 days for the whole website to be crawled. That's not how it works. But 5,000 a day for a website of that size seems like a good thing. Another thing maybe to keep in mind with the crawl rate is crawling more doesn't necessarily mean that your website will be seen as more relevant or rank higher. So there's no need to artificially push a higher crawl rate if we're already picking up all of the content that you're providing. Will AMP affect the search results? Should I start implementing it now or wait for a few more months and look forward to Google's further guidances, as there are not many proper AMP plugins available yet? So there is an official AMP plugin for WordPress available. I definitely take a look at that. It seems to be working fairly well. We do show AMP in kind of a news carousel in the search results on mobile, so that's one place it's definitely visible. I suspect it'll become more visible over time. I know the AMP people are extremely fast and extremely passionate about improving the web, so that's not something that I'd expect to kind of go away. Also, I expect other sites also to implement the kind of AMP viewer. It's open source. Anyone can essentially implement it on their site. I think Twitter and Pinterest and maybe some others have said that they're looking into doing this as well. So it's not just for search. It's not just for news. It's something that maybe it makes sense to kind of dig into a little bit more, regardless of your website. And if you work with multiple websites, if you're consulting for them, if you're an SEO agency, I definitely understand how AMP works so that you can inform your clients a little bit better. And when they come to you and say, should I be doing AMP? You can say, well, you should do it now. You should keep it in mind for later. Or at the moment, this doesn't seem to make sense with your specific website.
But what if like the CDN is really strong though? Because there's certain CDNs that have servers all around the world. One of them being a very popular one that everybody knows starts with a C.
C. I don't know which one starts with a C, but
okay, you said it.
Well, it's fine to mention names as long as you're not calling them out as spammers.
You have your own cloud thing, so it doesn't.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the neat thing about AMP is that it's not just a CDN. It's essentially a way of letting sites integrate your content directly, so that your content gets a little bit more visibility.
Yeah, so let's say if I'm searching from India and my website is located in the UK, yeah, it's a bit faster because the actual library is located in India. So this way it serves the user the library from the actual location, right?
Yeah, I mean, with AMP, it basically uses, so within Google search results, it uses Google's cache for AMP pages. So you essentially have Google's infrastructure behind your website should it become really popular. And I think the interesting part with AMP is really the combination of all of these different factors, in that by being able to understand your pages better, by knowing that it kind of is restricted to a very well-defined format, we can integrate those directly in the search results, and people can go really quickly to your pages, to your content within the search results. So that's something where even if you have a really fast site now, if you already use a CDN, if you have a great mobile-friendly version, then sometimes it does still make sense to create kind of these AMP pages so that you can do more with your content as well.
So now I should be like in the milliseconds.
Well, you could test the AMP pages with like what is it, webpagetest.org, to kind of see how they work. I think the Google AMP cache URLs all have the same URL structure with like the host name in front and then the website URL afterwards. So that's something you could kind of compare pages and see what happens. I think that might make an interesting blog post. I suspect the team is still going to be refining the whole setup there, since it just got launched like 2 days ago. So I wouldn't expect the current status to remain one-to-one in place for forever. And if you find issues where there are really speed problems, or where there's a big speed difference with the way that we host it and the way other people might host it, then that's definitely worth looking into on our side.
All right, sounds good.
I mean, it sounds like an interesting blog post to do, to kind of compare different website setups with AMP pages.
What do you think of I normally use a site like Pingdom. What do you think of that? Or do you trust more?
I don't know specifically what Pingdom does, but if you're just pinging the host, then that probably doesn't give you much insight on how it actually serves content.
No, they do website tests.
Okay. Well, if they check like the whole web page, then sure, why not? When are you going to add more business types to schema.org markup? Currently, we have to use local business markup as opposed to tool rental, which is our business. So I think schema.org is kind of a public organization that handles all of this markup. And I double-check where they discuss proposals and make sure to get your proposal in there as well. And if there's something that you think makes sense for your specific business that would be valuable within schema.org, by all means, go reach out to them and see how they pick up your proposal. We have rel publisher tag on every page on our site. I've heard you don't use this anymore. Should we remove it? Does it cause any harm? I don't actually know if we still use that. Good question. It's essentially meant to link your Google Plus page to your website, and I don't know what Google Plus is doing with that specific markup. So from a web search point of view, that's not something we would use directly because it's more for the Google Plus side. So from my point of view, you can do whatever you want with that. I'm sure it won't cause any problems in web search because we essentially don't use it for web search. Whether or not it's still important for the Google Plus side is something you probably want to check up with them. Why, if we choose a 302 redirect for a home page with a different local version, sometimes the URL shown by Google is not the original URL, but rather the local version instead. That can happen if we don't understand the relationship between the different URLs properly. So with the Hreflang markup, you can definitely let us know about that kind of collection of URLs, where what you would do is say the home page is an X default page, which means it kind of is a default version. It redirects based on the user's location, and the individual local versions would be indexed separately with their individual local Hreflang tags. So you'd have kind of this cluster of the local URLs and the one X default URL. And if you link those properly with Hreflang tags, then that's something we should be able to understand and show a little bit better in the search results. Does every folder in a URL need to exist? And if it doesn't, will this impact the flow of SEO equity across the website? For example, /hats, /cats, hats, and /hats alone just returns a 404. So I don't know what kind of hats cats would wear. That seems problematic on its own. But from our point of view, URLs are just identifiers. We don't require that something that looks like a folder is actually treated like a folder. So if you have one URL that's really long, and if the shorter version of that URL doesn't exist, then that's perfectly fine. That's not something that our systems would count against you. That's what happens on the web in practice, and we have to deal with that too.
John, so that kind of reminds me about one of the arguments between a flat hierarchy versus a proper hierarchy within the URL structure. And one of the arguments for a proper hierarchy is that if you consider one of those parts of the URL, say the category page URL in this scenario, the hats, that's considered to be like a chapter of a book, and if you open that chapter, it's got loads of other things inside it, and therefore that folder contains lots of content, so it's nice and important. Whereas if you open it and it's essentially empty, then it's not. But are you saying that's not the case? As a general resource, but as a general resource, if you open something and that's full of lots of content and links or subfolders for other things, that looks like a genuine resource for content. But if you open it and it's empty, then anything underneath that is also essentially useless.
I don't think we do that. I think what we usually do is just look at the links within the website, and if there are no links to that specific subdirectory, then we probably wouldn't even look at it. So I think in the past, when users were, I don't know, savvy enough to understand what a URL was and to kind of manually tweak the URL in the browser, that probably made a little bit more sense, and that they'd say, oh, I just want to look at all the hats, and then I'll kind of change the URL and look at that. But nowadays, URLs aren't even that visible in browsers anymore. On mobile phones, you really have to work hard to even look at the URL. So it's not something that I think users would do, and I don't think it's something that search engines would do at all.
All right. Yeah. But users might expect to see a breadcrumb that would mirror a URL structure somewhat.
I don't think a lot of people.
If you land on the cat's hats page, you might think, oh, actually, I'll look up at all of the hats. And if you can't, then.
But you could do that with normal breadcrumbs on the page too.
Yeah.
That's probably the easier way to handle that. I don't think a lot of people will navigate a site by URL. It's a little bit, the one exception that I know of is the homepage. So if your site's homepage disappears and goes 404 or has a parking page, it's just kind of blocked from being accessible, then oftentimes we'll assume that the whole website actually is broken. So that's kind of the one exception that I know of. But that's also the case where we're always linking to the homepage, and you're explicitly telling us to look at this page. Whereas with a specific folder within a website, I don't think we'd even care. Even if you link to that folder and it turned out to be a 404, that's life. We're not going to say everything below that folder is boom.
Okay.
All right. Someone has a quick question to ask. I'll let you go ahead. Michael?
I have to remember those keyboard shortcuts for unmuting. Let me just cancel that.
Oh no, now he's frozen. That was probably the wrong button to press.
Michael, we did ask a question on the actual page, on the Hangout page.
Okay.
It's on there if you want to.
Oh, lots of questions. It's crazy.
I can paste it into the chat if that helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me take a look at the chat. Whoa. Okay. We have a client that would like to register a number of domains for various languages. The website will be presented in rather than 301, the primary domain /language. We would like to mask the domains. However, are there any caveats, for example, to be aware of? For example, required rel canonical. The intention would be that the domain.es would redirect to domain.com/es, while the other domain would redirect to /co.uk, for example. From my point of view, you can definitely do that. So if you're moving from ccTLD structure to a generic top-level domain structure with subdirectories, you can definitely do that. I just make sure that you use geotargeting within Search Console for those individual subdirectories so that we still have that geotargeting information for them separately. I also expect that this is the kind of situation that's a little bit harder for us to process because you're essentially combining different sites into one big site. And that means we have to kind of recalculate all of the signals that we get for those individual pages and kind of understand the new site structure instead. So this is not something where I'd say it's like a trivial domain move from one domain to another, but rather you're combining multiple sites, and we really have to re-understand everything first. So I would expect that you need to be a bit patient for things to really settle down there.
It looks like they're talking about getting the country level domain, just buying the domains and redirecting them to the .com/country.
Okay, so basically,
if I read it right, but then it looks like if that's the case, then none of the header tags would be read anyway. So none of the.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, if you're using these for marketing purposes, like in offline ads or for other types of ads, you can just do whatever you want with that. That's not something that would really bother us because we'd focus on the URLs that actually have the content and use those instead.
But you wouldn't read any of the info, the tags, canonicals, because the 301 would kick in before.
Exactly. So we wouldn't take like the country information from that URL that's redirecting. We'd expect the country information to be on the URL that we actually index. All right, let me run through 2 or 3 more questions, and then we can open things up. Would the content within a blog post be used in rankings when that blog post is linked to an internal page? I mean, the rankings of the page it's being linked to. Essentially, we'd look at these pages on a per-page basis and use the content there. What we would take into account from a link is maybe the anchor text. So if within the link to another page, you give us some context of that other page, then that's something we take into account. Does Google give added weight to blog posts which have pictures to ones which don't? And how descriptive should the file names be to help? No, I don't think we give added weight to web pages that have pictures compared to pages which don't have pictures. Of course, if you have pictures, then that's something we could pick up for image search, but that's kind of separate from the whole web search side. if the top 3 results in e-commerce have AMP pages, then how will search engine show them in search results? I know news websites, but what about e-commerce websites which use schema for e-commerce websites? So at the moment, we only show news content within the AMP carousel. So we wouldn't show your e-commerce landing pages there. But of course, an e-commerce site can also have a blog, can also have a news section, and that content could be shown within the AMP carousel. So that's something that might give you some ideas on what you could do there too.
Actually, John, recently, just you said that if other websites also want, they can go for AMP. So I just wanted to understand. So I just wanted to understand if any e-commerce website goes for AMP, and top 3 or 4 results are AMP pages. So how Google has a plan to show them that these are the AMP pages?
I don't know. We'll see when we get there. I suspect there are lots of other types of content that will pick up first for AMP and show that in the search results, but I wouldn't be surprised if over time we also got to e-commerce type content and we're able to show that a little bit better as AMP in the search results. But I'm not aware of any specific plans there.
But for now, it is good for news websites and all informative kind of websites, like blogs.
Yeah.
Okay.
John, you mentioned even if a web e-commerce website has a blog or a resources section or something like that, you could use AMP.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But isn't AMP, so don't you need to be in Google News to be able to be shown?
No, it's purely for the web. Of course, some news sites are also in the Google News part as well, but any website can be shown in kind of the AMP carousel. And that's similar to the previous in the news block that we used to have on the search results, where any kind of newsy content could be shown there.
Okay, yeah, good to know.
Now that Google has removed the right-hand PPC ads, any insight on what will be put in all the white space?
My commercials, my banners.
I suggested cat photos, but I don't think they took me seriously.
What about YouTube videos?
YouTube videos, well, sure. I mean, I don't know. So I don't know what the specific plans are there. I know it's always hard to kind of figure out what the combination of the elements in the search results page should be. And I know that this is something that they work really hard on doing experiments to try to figure out how it actually works out, what works out, how we can make sure that the search results stay relevant for users.
But this is the longest test you guys have done. I mean, 6 years is a long time. You started in 2010, and it's not just like overnight. So
well, I mean, things change. You know,
yeah.
I'm happy when I see people do crazy experiments and crazy changes, because that kind of tells me that they're still kind of passionate about this and still trying to figure out what the right combination is. And sometimes the right combination changes over time, where we see users got used to this for a long time, it worked really well, but actually the web has moved on, or users have moved on, and now everyone is, I don't know, browsing the internet on their watch, and we have to figure out how to remain relevant there. It's just the same as all of you. You know, it's not like your website works once and you leave it alone for 20 years. You have to keep working on it to make sure that you don't lose touch with your user base.
Absolutely.
This also isn't a universal change, is it? I mean, there's right-hand side ads still for a lot of things.
I have no idea about.
No, it's gone pretty much for everything, but there's still some cache left. They said that they were tweaking that.
I have no idea what the ad side does, so we try to separate that fairly well.
John, is there an issue? Is there a ranking issue if you have issues with your JSON-LDs? Like if some JSON-LDs don't work on certain pages, that's a problem?
If you're using JSON-LD to provide structured data, then we wouldn't be able to pick up that structured data. So that's that aspect there. And if that structured data was important for your page, if you're using that for rich snippets, for example, that were visible in the search results, then obviously we wouldn't be able to show those rich snippets. But rich snippets aren't a ranking factor, so it would just affect how your site is shown in search, not at which position.
Okay, thanks.
Let me just grab 2 more questions here. Maybe link rel canonical to HTTPS page with :443. I guess it's a port thing. Is that bad for SEO? Is that fine? So 443 is the default port for HTTPS, which means we treat it as equivalent to the URL without the port number, and it would be the same. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. From my point of view, it's probably cleaner without the port. It's less likely to make a mistake there, but it's not going to cause any problems. And similarly for HTTP, the default port is 80. So if you have :80 at the end of the URL, then it's really the same thing as just without the :80. Did you change the way you read robots.txt and interpret the wildcard and the disallow option? We didn't actually change this. I think we updated our documentation a while back just to kind of reflect what the current state was. It was like that for a long time, where essentially the change is that you have to have a slash as the first character after like a disallow directive if you're specifying a path in the robots.txt file. It can't start with an asterisk or with a dot or anything else. It needs to start with a slash. And we also added that to Search Console to the robots.txt testing tool, which is why some people are seeing this flagged in Search Console as well. And essentially, we're trying to treat it the right way anyway, but we want to flag that in Search Console so that people are aware that theoretically this is kind of the wrong way to submit that line. OK, let's open it up for questions from you all. What else do we have left?
$350,000 sponsorship that you guys did for Let's Encrypt, but I want just forget the buying links and all that thing. So no, honestly, this is without criticism. I just wanted to just find out, like, so you attend, let's say, a $500,000 sponsorship event, and you didn't place that link. Like, you guys never placed that link, and it's a natural thing. I mean, you guys are attending it. It's not done intentionally. Just we got a link. So is that still against your guidelines? Because in your guidelines, if you read it and let even a lawyer analyze that, you never placed that link. I mean, they just added you because you're a part of the sponsors. They have a sponsors, they have a page that's dedicated to them. So how is?
I'd say it's a kind of a weird situation when you look at it from our side, because people might assume that we're supporting Let's Encrypt just to get a link, and that's definitely not the case. So essentially what the web spam team does when they look at things like this is they try to understand the intent of these individual links, and they try to understand how important are they within like the general site itself. Is this like a very common thing, or is this something that just happened to happen for a couple of things? So if we see that overall this website is well supported naturally, externally, and there's some problematic links, then that's not going to cause any problems from the web spam side. And that's the same for websites on our side as for any random other website externally. So if we see these kind of sponsorship links and we can recognize that the intent isn't really to manipulate the search results there, then that's not something that's going to cause any problems. And I think in some cases what the web spam team might do is just say, OK, we will just discount these links in the back end and kind of treat them like disavowed links so that they don't pass any PageRank, but we understand that there's no harm meant here. This is not with intent to cause any problems. So we'll treat that fine. And I mean, this is the same as if you're in a local business and you're active in local charities or local events.
Exactly.
Then they're going to put links on their website. You're not going to have any control over what's happening.
You don't have any control of that because it's a part of the event. I mean, they just want to put you in the spotlight there.
Yeah, I mean, these are things we have to deal with. This is like on the web. We're not going to go out and penalize all of these local charities and say, oh, you let people buy these links, and kind of tackle it from that side, because I think that would be like the wrong approach. On the other hand, if we recognize that individual sites are going out and saying, oh, well, I can donate $5 to this charity, and then I can get this link with free casino, poker, or whatever to my website, and we see that this is like all of the links from that website, then we might assume that actually these donations that they're doing are not just to kind of support that charity, but maybe there's something more behind it. So we try to look into it from the context of the whole website and to understand what's actually happening there.
Are $500,000 paid links a big issue? Are there many of those out there?
I don't know. I mean, I'm really happy that we're supporting Let's Encrypt, and I noticed they changed the link to nofollow for us, so it's something where we try to hold ourselves to a little bit of a higher bar, but at the same time, looking at the overall picture, this wouldn't change the ranking of the Google Chrome homepage anyway, so it's not something where I'd say the web spam team would be sent out and said, oh, you need to penalize this website for this one individual link here, or maybe there are 5, or I don't know. I'm sure the Chrome team supports lots of other good causes as well. But that's something we do for any website. It's not the case that we treat our websites differently. If anything, we'd hold our websites up to a higher standard. All right, one last question before I have to run off.
Yeah, John. Can you confirm us if Google has taken any action against reviews in search schema, in search result page?
Reviews.
Reviews have been dropped actually recently.
Yeah, this has come up in a couple cases where people have asked and said, oh, the review stars have been shown less frequently. And we double-checked with the team on that, actually, just to make sure, because usually it's kind of normal that the structured data the rich snippets kind of come and go depending on changes on our side. But they double-checked, and they said there was actually a bug, and it should be fixed, or it should be getting fixed soon, so that these will show up again a little bit more visibly.
It's back. It's back.
It's back. OK. I'm never sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
it's a good thing
to know that the turnaround time is pretty good.
Higher click-through rate.
All right, perfect. OK, so with that, let's take a break here. I'll be joining the AMP Hangout later today as well, if you want to join in there. That's with the Google Project Manager for the AMP team, which I'm sure will be interesting as well. All right. So otherwise, I wish you a great weekend, and maybe I'll see you again in one of the future Hangouts.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, John.
Bye, John.
Bye.